Ja, herzlich willkommen beim Podcast Heilsames Erzählen. Welcome at my podcast for storytelling and storytellers, and I'm very happy to speak today to Lucy Antrobus. She's founder and director of Refugee Voices, a non-governmental organization based in Switzerland, Lausanne. Lucy, you are not a storyteller yourself, but you empower the voices of refugees to tell their stories. So, what is your organization about and what work do you do?
Well, thank you so much, Iris, for the welcome, and I'm likewise very excited to be here and be exchanging with you. So, Refugee Voices really is about unlocking diverse human potential, and we do that through using storytelling as a vehicle for personal transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And we work and we focus on the refugee community because we see there's a lot of diversity inside of that community. These people come from all over the world, like Eritrea, Afghanistan, Iran, Venezuela, many different places. But there's also a pool of sometimes untapped talent and very unusual, crazy stories also. And what we do is when people have been through periods of trauma, they faced immense struggles such as starving for several weeks trying to cross the Sahara Desert, or have been trapped in prison, or at times things like living out of dustbins in order to stay alive on some extremes, then this trauma can cause the person to shut down and kind of isolate themselves and subsequently how they interact with their local community. And what we're really trying to do is getting them to open up again and bloom. And we do that through getting them to find their voice, to own their story, and as a result, to connect with their most powerful self and some of their inherent strengths and resilience.
Wow.
So that's a little flavor of what we do, and maybe to leave you with a metaphor to try and symbolize that. There's a flower called the California poppy, which when it stays in the shade the bud of the flower remains closed, but when it's exposed to sunlight, it opens and it blooms. So in a way, in the work that we do in our community, I'll tell you more soon enough, is in using joy and connection to trigger and channel those closed buds into being blooming flowers, to be able to both become agents of their own future and growth, but also to become more proactive, to enable them to contribute more easily to society.
Oh, that's lovely. And a lovely picture of the flowers. I like that very much. Lucy, I know that you are from a scientific background. You're not a storyteller yourself. So how come that you deal with this topic of refugee voices and empowering them?
Well, interesting, Iris, that you should ask that. I think in a way that somehow my work, my past work as a scientist and my training as a chemist, in fact, is very closely interlinked with unlocking human potential and working, as I call, as a human confidence catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a few different strands, a big journey like many others. Perhaps one orientation as a context to give you is I came from multinational, multicultural background, born and bred in the UK to South African parents and family dispersed across the world. And when I received my scientific training, I was determined to contribute to creating a more sustainable world through things such as renewable energy, creating catalysts, these materials that can help convert polluting substances into less polluting materials to help the environment. As I was on this pursuit, I worked in lots of different countries around the world. I worked in Mexico, I worked in Korea, I worked in Belgium, I worked in Texas, many different places. And really the biggest learnings that I received in working in all these different countries was through the culture and how I could rapidly, I was just there for handfuls of months at a time in my different placements, how I could really make a contribution to this culture in this project, make an impact, also whilst rapidly trying to understand and adapt to the culture and in support of that. And so somehow through this journey as a chemist, I somehow developed, we could call it a social experimentation laboratory by living in lots of diverse different places. I had the opportunity to work with women in Korea, which is an age-based hierarchy classically in their professional ecosystem, and to balance between respecting the culture but also holding strong to my principles such as equality, women empowerment, and how can I get the youngest woman in the room speaking as well as supporting the culture of the organization and the society at large. And so as a result of what we could call these experiments, I became really fascinated by how can we, no matter where people come from, when people have this inherent desire to give, to contribute, how can we enable that to happen faster? And whether it was on the shop floor in a production site in Mexico to being in a sales office in Korea,
wow,
the feedback I often received was just a real sense of empowerment and inspiration, and the people being incredibly grateful for, thank you for allowing me to take the stage or giving me that opportunity. And that as a result had this really interesting repercussive effect on other areas of their lives, whether it be professional or personal or creative. And so in a way, some of across in different corners of the world, some of the seeds for what we came to formalize in the methodology that we use in Refugee Voices were planted.
Mm-hmm. You used this beautiful image of the flower that, when put into the right conditions with sunlight and nourishing elements, can open up and come to bloom. So I imagine refugees, they are very vulnerable people. They have, as you stated, lived through trauma, bad conditions. So how does it exactly work? What do you do in your work with these people so they can own their story and find their story?
So let me tell you more, first of all, why we use storytelling as a vehicle for personal transformation. And then, in a way, I'm going to work backwards about what does our process and methodology actually look like to enable that. Let's imagine, for example, at the end of a 3-month program, we've been working with a group of, say, 20 refugees once a week for several hours. And at the end of a program, they take to a stage and they share their story about perhaps how they traversed the Sahara Desert or came to Switzerland, or their dream to become a doctor, whatever it is. And that experience of being in front of a group of people who are all listening to their story, inspired by it, is quite symbolic for, wow, well, if before I was struggling so much even to just survive, and I was struggling with depression and lack of sleep and difficulty finding a job, making friends, even something as simple as looking people in the eyes. And then now I have 100 people looking at me, listening to me, taking an active interest in my story. What does that mean for who I am? And then what can I become? So in a way, starting at the end of the process, we'll use these moments of sharing their story to generate this kind of pride and use it as a springboard for, okay, if I've done this today, and this was something that months ago or days ago I didn't believe was possible for myself, what else can I do in my future that previously I didn't believe was possible? So that's, in a way, the symbolic relevance of storytelling. And the beauty, in a way, then, of storytelling is that it's so accessible to everybody. So it becomes a very, let's call it, democratic tool of empowerment, because by simply having another person with you, you can go through this exchange. Mm-hmm. And connection. So there's a little bit about the framing of where we're going to with it, and why we use that to symbolically enable this mm-hmm. empowerment and this growth of confidence. But then, okay, then you're probably asking me, oh, Lucy, that sounds very nice, but
how do you do it?
How do you get there? So to then start from the beginning, we have a lot of people, and we're always in a way excited to work with them, who maybe come to us in the beginning. For example, a young man called Tuwelde from Eritrea. He will say, he will be whispering to us because he's nervous to look at at us in the eyes and nervous to even speak out loud fully on a one-on-one basis. And he goes down into a whisper. Or we'll have another young man called Kalim who comes in and his body language is incredibly closed. And he's looking down, he's afraid to look at us. He comes across as a small kind of like a wounded Bambi that you want to care for. And so often the manifestation of people that we start with is a lot of shyness, a lot of timidity, a hesitation to use their voice, to look people in the eye, to interact with others and make friends. What we do then is take them on a very gradual step-by-step process, which is a bit like very gently getting into a warm bath and slowly increasing or decreasing the temperature by very gradually increasing the risk and the complexity of the activity that we do with them. When I speak risk and complexity or risk and vulnerability, what I'm referring to is very basic social things, such as if we imagine on the one end of the scale, it can be very scary for somebody, no matter what their background, to stand on a stage and speak to a group of people. It's sort of research that everybody, or 80% of people have this fear of public speaking.
Yes.
So in a way, we're like, that's where we're going. But how do we get there in a very, very step-by-step basis? So no throwing them in the deep end, but what's the first thing that they can share that it's easy and feels natural and feels comfortable and they feel in a way in their comfort zone, but that also can help us get to know them and connect with who they are. So a very simple starting point would be getting them to express something around their name and the origin of their name. And this can be quite a beautiful and enlightening exercise, because you suddenly discover, oh, wow, the name of Jerubala means a flowing river in Arabic or in Tigrinya or whichever language it comes from. And we have another one that means sword and like a warrior. And suddenly you build this beautiful, rich picture of the characters that you have around you just on something as simple as one's name. And that can apply to people from wherever they are in the world. There's always a meaning or an origin or a significance of one's name. Or if they don't know the origin or meaning, which is very rare, perhaps a famous person, Ali, like Muhammad Lami, like the fighter. And that can get them in a quite playful way to express something of who they are. And what we do is just from that point on, we'll go very gradually, step by step, introducing greater complexity or greater risk. So a complexity might be, okay, not just about your name, but maybe where you come from or your family. Still very, very simple, but very taking them in gently. And the risk might be, okay, instead of just sharing it with your partner, maybe now you're going to share with it in a group of 3. We're increasing the risk or the vulnerability of both who and how large the audience that they share with, but also the nature of the content that they're sharing. And what you'll find is, with positive reinforcement through this process, that very, very quickly you can get them to a place where they'll share something really deep and vulnerable. Mm-hmm. This can be something such as why I had to flee Syria or how I managed to escape the Taliban and what my journey was like to eventually find a job in this new land in Switzerland that I live in. Why that's incredibly important, incredibly powerful, is because in those moments when someone's really shared something about who they are and the darkest fears but biggest triumphs also in life, that's a moment when other people go wow and feel super connected to them and super inspired. And when they receive that suddenly, after sharing this thing that was potentially really traumatic for them at the time, but it's inspired somebody else, it makes them feel stronger, because they've transformed in a way what was a difficulty or pain into strength, into resilience, and into inspiration for others. What we see or we notice in our community is when these different people have been through all sorts of journeys, from the jungle to the Sahara, to seeing others die in front of them, to houses collapsing, but also incredibly amazing, normal, human, beautiful things, relationships, marriages, birthdays, the daily routine and going to the supermarket. And they have connected on this very deep and personal level. Suddenly they gain this additional appreciation for each other and one another and their struggles and inspiration from it. But they also gain this greater sense of appreciation and pride for themselves. And that's really beautiful, because that pride can then have a knock-on impact in different areas of their lives, about how they walk, to how they take themselves seriously, to what they believe is possible.
Actually, I think this is a very relevant thing because it means they start to own their story, to become familiar with it, to take pride in what they have reached. So in a way, everybody can learn from this experience, from this path towards healing storytelling in that case. Can other communities benefit from this too?
Absolutely. It was a very exciting thing that we discovered. Oh, wait, hang on a second. We've kind of developed this methodology, developed it inside of the refugee community, which is part of our origin story. But in that process, also realized, wow, there was this phenomenal success case for a woman who'd suffered domestic abuse, for a senior man who'd been made redundant, and how he took back ownership of his career. And so we realized, wait a second, it's not just refugees who were needing this joy and this connection to as an antidote to their suffering, but that many different communities, maybe young women, professionals who are trying to get up or challenge the glass ceiling in their career, these different community groups can benefit. And I think probably we can all think about areas of ourselves that we maybe feel less comfortable about or shameful about or wish that we were a bit different. And in a way, this process enables us to take ownership of who we are so that we own it and we wear it as a strength rather than trying to hide it. And that subsequently enables us to go higher places than we could have otherwise.
So perhaps, do you remember one of those brilliant moments that you have experienced during your work?
Sure, there are many, so it's quite hard to pick. I would say maybe I'll give you a very quick version of a snapshot of one of the stories,
Yeah.
and then a slightly deeper dive into another, so we get a contrast. There was one young man who is Eritrean and young. He was in his early 20s, around 21, and he was telling us this story of how he voyaged through the Sahara. There was an immense amount of wind and this sandstorm. He was there struggling to survive, trying to make it through for several months on end. And what so happened is this young African man, his hair grew. So he described this picture of him having a big afro and a huge beard because he was not able to go to the barber store. But also that in these big sandstorms, he would get stuck so that all the way up to his neck, he was covered in sand. And sometimes was stuck there for days on end in these sandstorms. And so in a way, it's a very harsh reality of what he went through. But the amazing part that he described to us was that the way that he got through this was by imagining himself as James Bond traversing the Sahara. Because he said what he experienced was so unreal and so beyond different to his expectations. It felt so unreal that it felt like he was in a film and he was in a movie. And so by imagining himself as this adventurer and as a James Bond, that gave him the mental strength to make it through.
That's wonderful. I like that.
And that's one.
Yeah.
There's many.
Yeah.
And perhaps to introduce one of our methodologies, we have something called the 3 M's, where what we're really trying to do is people who've had very limited experience speaking or coaching or anything of storytelling nature, to rapidly get them to become very engaging storytellers. One of the ways we do that is think, well, they've all got these amazing, inspiring stories. If we can tap into a real, amazing, unique moment in their lives and get them to share that with courage and vulnerability and all the emotion associated, they don't have to be a super refined, amazing speaker, but the raw courage and content of that authentic story will shine through. One of the ways we do to get there is the 3 M's, and what that stands for is, 1 is moment, the 2nd M is metaphor, and the 3rd M is message. The moment is first trying to find in this myriad, a smorgasbord of so many amazing stories and moments, struggles and triumphs, where is a real hook of something really that shifted you, changed your life, inspirational, took place, but that we can share in a very short space of time. And so we'll lock onto a moment. So for one young man, Shishai, this was on a boat on the way, crossing on his way from Libya to Greece. He shared this moment of being in a boat, stuck down below board, with all fully blacked out and barely enough space to breathe, stuck between other bodies. That brings me, I'll jump around a bit, to the third M, which was message.
Mm-hmm.
And what he spoke about in this story was then that he kept calling for the younger people in the deck below, kept calling for, how long until we get there? When we arrive, do you see land? A man on the deck above described as saying, yes, have courage, young man, we are not far, I see land ahead, and would continually, through the hours that they were stuck, would continually offer him words of encouragement and, in a way, nourishment in these dark and difficult hours. Fast forward there, the ship actually collapsed. There was a shipwreck and people, some made it to land. And so this young man, Shishai, was looking around everywhere for where is this man, Jamal, to thank him. A young boy came up crying and was screaming, Jamal, Jamal. And it turned out that this young man had lost his father, and his father was Jamal. The amazing part about the story was that Shishai then learned that Jamal was in fact blind. Even though he'd been blind, he'd still been encouraging, giving words of wisdom to the young below. We said, Shishai, well, what does this mean for you? What's the message from this story? Shishai said, well, what I understand the message is, no matter what our restrictions, no matter what our constraints or the things that hold us back, we can still help one another. We can still empower and support another person. And so his message then to us as a group, as an audience, what we should all take hands, se tenir la main, hold hands and support each other in united front, because no matter what we come from, what our restrictions are, we can still make a difference.
That's really beautiful, really. It's very touching to me. So how can we listen to these stories of your refugees?
Good question. Well, I'd be very curious to know if there is desire from the community that we develop more regular story sharing. We do events probably about once every 3 months, either in person or online. We've started doing more content sharing, live Q&As with different alumni from our community and different partnerships. So there's always ways to unlock these in different groups of people where if partners want to work with us, we may be, prompted by some inspiration, be developing a channel where we're exclusively sharing these stories, just these nuggets and anecdotes of stories of adventure, of triumph, of strife, but also just of humanity at its finest.
Lucy, one more question. Do you train trainers so they can perform the work you do and help others to become this kind of owning their own stories?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, it's the thing which amongst all of these other stories gets me the most excited, because in a way, it's the embodiment of empowerment. And we have one mantra many mantras in our community. One of them is empower another to empower yourself. What we're actually doing throughout the program is everybody is teaching each other. We provide the space, the environment, and facilitate these exercises and insights coming out. But ultimately, you're going to learn a key insight by looking your partner or your group in the eyes and the feedback that they reflect back to you. In a loose sense, we're constantly wanting to empower and coach people that they're not only experiencing the training or gaining confidence, but they are starting to embody it such that they could also share that with another. And we manifest that in our program through people becoming coaches of each other. We listen, there was the 3 M's, there's actually a 3M+1, there's a 4th bonus M, which is M for emotion, and where we'll listen into when somebody's sharing, where is the emotional resonance coming from, and try and dig into that piece of the story. And so we're training everyone on how can they become deeper and better listeners to another, and support and coach another, that helps them in turn become a more powerful and engaging storyteller. So that's how we do it loosely and in a way informally throughout our program. And then on top of that, we develop partnerships for doing exclusively train the trainer, because now that we've discovered in a way this magic, and we feel the sense of responsibility. Oh my goodness, it's so simple. It's just reliant on human connection and manifesting joy and exploring different energy levels and peaks and troughs and all sorts of things I could get geeky about. But ultimately, it's quite simple, but just often overlooked. So how can we after discovering this magic, empower it, gift it to other communities. So we're exploring a partnership with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in the north part of Northern Africa to build train the program for their leadership team to then train groups of refugees in the refugee camps to train others and so forth. So we have this kind of catalytic type effect. But we're also looking at, on a very simple basis, in-house, one of the first, let's say, graduates of our program. I'm gonna change her name just for confidentiality purposes. Jenny was one of the first people who came to our sessions, and she had lost custody of her kids. And she said, came at the end very emotionally and passionately said, if I can show this confidence to the courts, I can get my kids back. And 3 months later, Jenny has her kids back, but not only that, but she became my program manager for this program. And so step by step, she went from being a participant to co-facilitating, to lead facilitator, to designing sessions, to designing programs, and so forth and so forth. And that's really, in a different way, the journey that we want every person in our community to go on, whether it's a team member, whether it's a refugee, a migrant, or someone from a different background. They're constantly growing and tapping into higher and higher levels of their potential. And in a way, the Train the Traeger program is just one embodiment of one of these exciting ways that we can share this what we've just stumbled upon, but that is kind of like human magic.
So I think I will put in the show notes some links where one can find Refugee Voices in the net, and also on Instagram, where one can connect with you and your work and get information about next and upcoming events.
Yes, fabulous. Our website is www.refugeeleaders.org, and we are on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and soon other platforms under a variation of Refugee Voices. And we'd love to hear. We love hearing from our community. They are both in our refugee community and our broader community base. They are really the fuel, the flame that keep us going and encourage us to keep building and doing what we're doing. So we'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your feedback, and maybe you also have some stories to share. So please do get in touch.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for taking your time and giving us this beautiful insight into your work. And I wish you a lot of luck for the upcoming events, for your refugees, for all the plans and projects you are having. And I'm looking really forward to hear more of your Refugee Voices.
Thank you so much, Iris. It's been an absolute pleasure. And likewise, think it's wonderful what you're doing, bringing voices to more storytellers and connecting more people up with inspiration to feed their souls.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
That was the podcast interview today with Lucy Antrobus. Thank you for listening, and I wish you a lot of fairy tales in your life. Vielen Dank. Das war der Podcast Heilsames Erzählen für heute. In den Shownotes gibt es wie immer weitere Infos, eine Transkription auch auf meinem Blog zum Podcast. Und ansonsten wünsche ich euch alles Gute und eine märchenhafte Zeit.